Hey guys, it's Merlin here, and I'm here to bring you a movie review. A few hours ago, I saw the film Beautiful Creatures. My sister wanted to go out to see a movie, and I have the ability to get some free movie tickets. So I was like, hey, what the hell? And I did not know that Die Hard was playing, and I wasn't really that interested to see it anyway. So I saw Beautiful Creatures instead. And to be honest, I had seen one trailer and one poster for this movie. And I really didn't know what to think of it. One thing I have to say about movies these days is that when it comes to advertising, they really market their trailers very differently. Like, for instance, Warm Bodies, they marketed that like it was a comedy, but it was actually kind of a drama. It's a bit off topic, but that's just an example of what I'm talking about. With Beautiful Creatures, I really didn't know what to expect. I mean, I should have sensed there was something supernatural, and I didn't know that it was based on a novel, kind of a young adult teen novel, but that didn't really affect it. But going in with virtually no expectations, I didn't think I'd hate it. I didn't think I'd love it. I actually really enjoyed this film. I think it's getting more mixed reviews, and I think I understand why. But let's get into the plot. Beautiful Creatures is a supernatural romance of sorts based on a fantasy novel, and it was directed by Richard LaGravenese. It takes place in a small southern town and opens following our main character of Ethan White, a 16-year-old kid whose actor doesn't look 16 at all, by the way. He's a fairly simple but well-meaning kid who basically has dreams of getting out of his small town and doing something with his life, but really having no sense of direction. He feels like he doesn't fit in there, and he's a really cool, likable character. That's one of the best things about this film is definitely him. But he's a very simple and fairly average teenage kid, but with dreams of something bigger. And they really set the atmosphere of this town as being not necessarily backwards, but very stuck in the past, and not really welcoming to anything new or different, even though it has a rather colorful history. And eventually this girl comes to his school, and her name is Lena. Now, we spend the first half hour or so of the film really getting to know Ethan, and just learning about his character, finding that he really enjoys reading various different kinds of novels, typically cult books that people don't really accept in his town, things like Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, Clockwork Orange, Naked Lunch, all excellent books and films, by the way. And then once Lena is introduced, he's intrigued by her because everyone in the school automatically thinks that she is some sort of Satan worshiper because her family has something of a dark past, which makes it very difficult for her, being that this is a very old-fashioned right-wing southern town. However, after taking some time to warm up to her, which is initially difficult because she's a very cold individual who's apparently had a hard time fitting in various schools, as she's moved from school to school pretty much throughout the country for most of her life. But through Ethan, she finds a friend, and eventually a romance sparks and develops. And they take a really good time developing this, and it seems very real. The characters feel very fleshed out, and it's a very believable situation. These two outcast characters finding each other and having a legitimate connection. Things get interesting as we find that the individual that Lena's staying with, her uncle, is a member of a supernatural family. It turns out that Lena is part of a long line of spellcasters, essentially witches and wizards, really. Just beings with interesting supernatural powers that they can alter reality and cast all kinds of ridiculous spells. It's actually pretty intense. Now, you might think this sounds cheesy, but it's actually handled really well. It doesn't really get too far into the corny elements, though they do make a few interesting jokes here and there. They don't pander too much. And the romance doesn't feel too lovey-dovey, though there are points where it does get a little bit oversaturated. Now, her uncle is very defensive of Lena and tries to keep Ethan away from her. However, as he and other family members find out, this is very difficult, as their love is very strong. And of course, all teenage kids want to go against their parental figures. It's just the natural way of things. But there is a reason for this. At first, we think that her uncle, played by Jeremy Irons, who is awesome by the way, is basically being an asshole. However, he has a legitimate purpose for this. Upon her 16th birthday, Lena will undergo a transformation, determining whether or not she essentially goes to the light side or the dark side of the Force. I know it sounds like I'm just making a random Star Wars reference there, but that's pretty much what it is. For some reason, specifically when a female caster turns 16, fate literally determines whether or not their inner nature will reveal itself and turn them truly dark or evil, though apparently males have a stronger ability to resist this and choose their own path. And we learn that this is due to a curse upon the family which happened many years ago, in which her ancestor performed the one taboo within the caster line, and that is to try and bring the person that she loved back from the dead, which in turn turned her into a horrible monster. And this is a curse which has plagued all the females in her family for generations. Along with her mother, who is essentially the antagonist of the film, hoping to push Lena to the dark side, and by using Ethan to try and get to her. And the rest of the film after this point is essentially Lena and Ethan learning about the history of the curse and attempting to find a way to break it, with some snags in the way. Now, from what I described, this probably sounds like a fairly stereotypical and cliche concept for a teen drama. But the thing is, from a stylistic point of view, this film was handled really well. This film didn't feel like a standard commercialized creation. The casting was superb. I mean, honestly, this had probably one of the best casts of characters I've seen in a film in quite some time. The actors were all top-notch, and they had great chemistry with one another. And the way these characters were written, I admit I have not read the novel, but I'm assuming that it was fairly well written simply because these characters were very fleshed out. And the believability of their reactions to each other, especially the chemistry between the two leads, was fascinating. And I think this was a primary combination of the writing and the acting coming together to pull off a relatively good story. And though admittedly there were a lot of cliches in this, it didn't get oversaturated by them. And even though this film was stylistic, it didn't overdo it on the special effects or the sets that they became distracting. It felt like this was a very real story. In fact, until the supernatural element was introduced, it didn't even really feel like this was going to be a supernatural film. I won't reveal the ending, but it's actually a fairly mature and rather non-cliche way to resolve certain storylines like this. Though admittedly it does kind of cheat a little bit at the ending, which kind of sabotages what they were going for a little bit. But I won't spoil that because it's not really a huge disappointment. I pretty much praised all the pros of this film. Now I'll go into the cons. And there are only a few cons that I can really think of off the bat, but the truth of the matter is, even though this film never really bored me, it did feel like it dragged, especially towards the latter half an hour or so of the film. It just feels like they kind of stretch out the cute romance element a little bit more than they needed to. And this is partially because the character of Ethan, who's a really strong, believable, and likable character, essentially reverses roles. And while the film is basically his for the first half hour to an hour, which seems like a really interesting coming-of-age tale focusing on him, once the supernatural element is developed, Lena kind of takes over the film, and though it still works rather well, the strength of the drama kind of gives way to the cheesiness and cliche of the supernatural story. Though, like I said, it was handled far better than a lot of films like it have done before. Another problem I said was the ending, which I won't spoil, but I'm just thinking, even though it could have been excellent, it only turned out to be okay. And it was probably the most disappointing aspect of the film, is that I would have had a more solid rating of this if not for that last 2-second aspect right at the end. There's also one more con, which to be perfectly honest is more of a personal preference thing. For a film which seemed like it was going to have more action, there really was very little action in this film. Not entirely sure why. It didn't really need it, it survived without it, and there was some good action at the end, though there were also a few unresolved plot points due to the major action that does happen towards the end, which kind of makes you question certain things about the plot towards the end. Though they're ultimately minor things that you think about a little more after the film is done. As far as this film's lasting impact on me, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. I really liked the concept of the story. It bordered on cliche, but never quite went all the way. The characters were very well written. The actors had great chemistry. The costume design was great. The cinematography was excellent. The music was surprisingly good and not overused. And it had some really powerful moments. Is it a great film? No. But it was a lot better than I was expecting, and I would certainly say that it's a good, fairly solid film, especially for a supernatural romantic fantasy about witches. Alright guys, those are my thoughts on Beautiful Creatures. Let me know if you guys saw it, what you think of it. Merlin out. Peace.